Hi, my name is s.vireday, and I am doing my final project on Citizen Sleeper. To be a human is to be able-bodied. In 2022, the game development studio Jump Over the Age created a game that was published by fellow traveler called Citizen Sleeper. Jump Over the Age is a one-person studio founded and run by Gareth, Damian, Martin, they, them, who described in an interview with Wired some of their core guiding ideas when creating this game, stating that when market experiments and disruptive practices are trialed to squeeze extra hours out of workers, the results play out across the bodies and minds of people with no choice but to work to survive. In Citizen Sleeper, the player character plays a robot designed to be an imperfect copy of a human whose debt to a corporation called s.vireday became so immense that they took a deal. The human's mind would be copied, while the original would be put into cryosleep. The copy would then occupy a robotic body that would work performing labor for s.vireday until the debt has been paid off, which usually takes at least hundreds of years, at which point the original would be woken from cryosleep and free to live their life. Working conditions for these robot copies, referred to by the narrative as sleepers, are horrible. Living a chained existence as an imperfect copy designed to perform labor indefinitely inspires many of these sleepers to try their hand at escaping from the grip of s.vireday, including the main character, the player. You start the game having escaped and just barely having made it to a space station on the edge of the known universe, where now the sleeper must grapple with the problem of how to continue their existence. They must make money, generate energy, repair their body, and figure out a way to get rid of the tracker that s.vireday has implanted in their body in order to truly gain their freedom. A pivotal aspect of the story is the explanation of the design of the sleeper's body. You quickly find out that when you are not under the thumb of s.vireday, your body breaks down within a matter of days and will cease functioning. s.vireday provides the sleepers with what is essentially medication to manage their bodies and keep them in optimal condition, but s.vireday is the only producer of this medication. When the sleeper no longer has access to their necessary medical treatment, their body slows down and within a few days shuts down completely. The sleeper can stave off the shutdown by cobbling together spare parts to repair their body and finding temporary solutions. But one of the first initial problems is that this is not sustainable. The sleeper must find a better substitution for this medication quickly if they want to survive. Almost everyone, from individuals to institutions that the sleeper encounters, regards them as functionally different, so remotely incapable of experiencing what it means to be human that they are not regarded as a person, a separate entity with rights. They are an extension of a mountain of debt that has escaped their purpose and are often treated accordingly. In such, I argue that to be human in this story is to be able-bodied, an accepted norm that is so commonplace that it becomes invisible, taken for granted. To be human in this society is to participate in compulsory able-bodiedness, coined by McRuer, 2006, page 2. Compulsory able-bodiedness draws from the theory of compulsory heterosexuality, where society's expectations force an ideal way to be onto all its members. Of course, the sleeper is not regarded as human. Their body is fundamentally different from everyone else's, and they are unable to function the way everyone else does. The sleeper, in this way, is an analogy for existing in a body that is not able-bodied, or more simply, a body that is disabled. The sleeper is disabled in the context of a world where they are not the norm. The definition of disabled and able-bodied are dependent on each other. Without a definition for what is considered able-bodied, or in Citizen Sleeper, human, there can be no definition of what is disabled, or a sleeper. Both categories are dependent on each other to define the boundaries of these terms. I want to make the argument that the sleeper is an analogy for chronic and terminal illness and dynamic disabilities using CRIP theory, which is a diverse assembly of critical perspectives on disability, indebted not only to cultural studies, but also to materialist models of disability and feminist theory. Based on how recently they have taken their life-saving medication, the amount of tasks and quality of their work they are able to complete changes day by day, with the amount reducing the farther they are from their last dose. Dynamic disabilities are ones that cause a person's abilities to change on a regular basis. Part of their disability is the fact that they have a hard time telling what they'll be able to do on a given day. The conventional view of disability is that it is a persistent and unchanging limitation. However, many persons with disabilities may not follow this relatively stable pattern. Instead, They may experience periods of good health interrupted by periods of their limitations, on-again, off-again episodes, or their limitations may change over time, worsening, improving, or fluctuating. Such changing disabilities can be characterized as dynamic, as opposed to continuous disabilities, which tend to be more stable over time. The sleeper exemplifies this in the form of a simple game mechanic meant to implement strategy and planning. When the player has to conserve energy and prioritize time-sensitive tasks based on what the sleeper is able to accomplish, they are experiencing just a small facet of what it is like to live with a dynamic disability. If the player does not use their time and energy wisely before getting their next dose, it is completely possible to fail parts of the story, locking the player out of storylines and events. Introducing this real consequence drives home that for people living with dynamic disabilities, this happens all the time. Having to choose what to prioritize means some things will fall to the wayside, and there are real consequences for that, ones that are beyond their control, but that still have real impacts on people. The existence of the life-saving medication in the first place, the need of the sleeper to be reliant on something produced in a laboratory to manage their symptoms and repair their dying body, the way all actions center around when the next dose of this medication will be available, is a prime example of lived realities of disabled people. The sleeper is reliant on people who don't have their best interest in mind, because they exist in a body designed for decay without proper support systems. They struggle too because there is no precedent for people like them. Later in the game, it is possible to encounter another escaped sleeper and to learn about them. But the rate of sleepers who manage to escape S.and.ARP suggests that people are not prepared to deal with them, or at least do not want to learn how to deal with them. And there is always the question of who they are looming over their head. There are two seemingly conflicting analytical trajectories within both crip and queer theory. On the one hand, a radical questioning of fixed identities and received categorizations. On the other hand, the struggle to name oneself. The sleeper never gains another name throughout the game, only simply referred to as sleeper, or in some cases, nicknames based on their robotic body. The label of sleeper is something that both confines them, placing rigid boundaries on their identity that don't always fit their lived reality, but also gives them meaning and definition in a world wholly unprepared for someone like them. It provides them connection with other sleepers and understanding of themselves, even if that understanding is limited. A central aspect of crip theory is its critique of the binary structure of society, according to which the able-bodied and the disabled are seen as opposites. In Citizen Sleeper, multiple characters are seen experiencing several different kinds of disabilities, but are never treated like the sleeper is for simply existing in a norm-breaking body, because they are still human. One must thus conclude that even though we may all be in the same boat, it is still a fact that some bodies are keel-hauled while others dine at the captain's table. Because they are human, these characters are treated as filling the social role of able-bodied people, the norm, while the sleeper fills the role of norm-breaking, of disability, of not human. The amount of energy and labor the sleeper must put into obtaining their medication is also an apt example of the realities of living with a disability that needs treatment under a capitalist structure. Every day, the sleeper must complete enough tasks that earn them money in order to save up just enough for their next dose, which just barely enables them to do it all again. Notably, there are also interesting things for the sleeper to spend money on, and other tasks the sleeper can complete that are often time-sensitive and also presented as important. Meaning the player has to make a decision about what to prioritize and determine how long they can ignore the sleeper's needs in order to progress the game's story. In one of the endings for the game, the sleeper can choose to get on a ship that will take decades to reach a planet which will be settled by those on the ship. The majority of its passengers are put into cryosleep at the beginning of the journey and will be awoken once they reach their destination. However, there must be a skeleton crew maintaining the ship and fixing problems as they arise, as well as making sure that the passengers are awoken at the right time. The sleeper will encounter a father and his daughter in this game, whose goal is to board that ship. The father, Lem, explains that this is the only way he can ensure a future for his daughter, Mina, where she can live on a planet rather than the cold void of space, and will provide her opportunities that she could never access on the space station. While Mina will be an adult by the time they reach the planet, it will still make a huge difference in her life. If the sleeper chooses to board the ship with them as part of the skeleton crew, there will be an epilogue explaining what happens to the sleeper, Lem, and Mina as time goes on. As mentioned before, Mina is an adult when they reach the planet, and spent her childhood drifting through space, but now she gets to experience solid ground beneath her feet and the ability to form a new world. Lem dies during the passage, simply from old age, but content in the knowledge that he has secured a future for his daughter. The sleeper dies too. Despite being a robot that, given proper care, could theoretically live for a very long time, the game tells you that eventually you run out of medication, and eventually your own repairs and meals can only do so much. The condition you were given when you were given a body catches up to you, and it is a bittersweet ending. The game gives you a life as the sleeper that is mundane. The sleeper spends their days repairing a ship headed towards a place they will never get to see. They spend their life constantly seeking ways to extend their time past just a few days, living in a constant state of uncertainty over how long they have before everything breaks down one last time. It is mundane, marked by uncertainty and exhaustion, and yet it is a life that the sleeper makes for themselves. Despite not being able to choose their initial circumstances, they create meaning in the mundane and create a family with Lem and Mina, giving purpose where they could have chosen to give up. A life can be meaningful no matter what struggles and challenges are presented, and no matter how seemingly mundane. In this, we see how the sleeper exemplifies not only dynamic disabilities and chronic illness, but terminal illness as well. Almost on the flip side of this is an ending of the game where the sleeper discovers a network of artificial intelligences within the data of the eye itself. There is an untouched sector of the data cloud that is occupied by a being calling themselves the Gardener. The Gardener explains to the sleeper that they are a hive mind of all these artificial intelligences, ones with no need for a body and released beyond the boundaries of physical limitations. They invite the sleeper to join the hive mind, which would require them to give up their body, and in doing so, free themselves from their planned obsolescence and norm-breaking functionality. If the sleeper accepts, they lose their body as well as the boundaries of their mind, melding together to become a part of the Gardener. In a way, this is a death as well. The death of the sleeper's body and the death of the original form of the sleeper's mind. The sleeper does not exist anymore as themselves, because they gave up their identity as a sleeper, and as such, gave up their identity as disabled. This death, however, comes as a choice, and arguably could be taken as an analogy for coping with disability through suicide, compared to the other ending where you die of essentially old age. The game does its best to not present either of these options as fundamentally good or bad, but simply avenues that can be taken and are inherently up to the player to decide if this is the ending they want. I think that a representation of all the avenues a life can take is important, without imposing morality onto the endings. Damian Martin allows room for the player to decide the morality of their own endings for themselves. One of the core tenets of crip theory is the idea of turning the word crip from a noun into a verb. To crip something is to spin mainstream representations or practices to reveal able-bodied assumptions and exclusionary effects, thus bearing witness to past and present injustice. Essentially, turning the norms around to examine them, and raise questions of why we assume the things we do from a lens of compulsory able-bodiedness being baked into society as a whole. Examining the sleeper as an analogy for disability crips the narrative of Citizen Sleeper, allowing room for the game to carry a message about our own society and its norms. The player, regardless of ability status, will get to experience a small piece of life with a visible disability the society severely ostracizes you for, and allows the player to re-examine their own life and position in society, the ways in which they may unconsciously participate in compulsory able-bodiedness, and how disability and ability are informed by one another because of their experiences with the game when viewed through the lens of crip theory. Thank you.